Villains are destined to die. Chapter 61. What the hell? I was flustered to see the white notification box appear from nowhere. Since I hadn't attended the hunting tournament while playing in normal mode, I had no way of knowing a quest like this even existed. While I frantically tried to figure out what to do, more letters appeared in the rectangular dialogue box. System. This main quest will be auto-accepted in 5 seconds. System. 5 system. 4 system. 3. The countdown mercilessly ticked lower, and I quickly pressed decline since I had no more time to think about it. The window vanished immediately, leaving something worse in its place. It's been a while, my lady. Red eyes met mine. Shit. I forced down the scream that begged to escape my lips, eyes darting around for some kind of exit instinctively. When did he get so close? I'd taken my eyes off him for only a moment to check the system notification, and in that time the Crown Prince had approached without a sound. He was leaning over the table and smiling like a predator that had cornered its prey. I could see white teeth gleaming from behind his red lips, and the sight frightened me more than any ghost ever could. I was finding it hard to breathe. Greetings, second son of the Empire, I finally managed to say with great effort, my voice trembling. It's near impossible to gain an audience with you. Did you know that? I heard that you were running a high fever from iron poisoning. Are you feeling better now? He asked in a mocking tone, ignoring my greeting. It was true, I'd been ill for a few days after he cut me. I wanted to snap back that I wasn't feeling better at all, but I knew better than to risk my neck like that. No doubt thanks to your well wishes, I recovered without issue, I said, forcing myself to smile. His next words made my stomach drop. If you'd but asked me to visit while you were ill, I'd have run to you without a second thought. I waited with great anticipation but received no message from you. What? I started. What fresh load of bullshit is this? I shook my head vehemently, forcing words from my lips I neither felt nor believed. I could never ask someone as busy as His Highness to come, just because I was sick. I'm really all right, Your Highness. Very healthy. That hurts my feelings. What's wrong with calling for me? For all you know, we could become lovers one day. What? I felt dizzy like I might faint. What the hell is he talking about? Abandoning my forced smile, I spoke with trembling lips. We? Who do you mean? Me and you, of course, he said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. It was like I could hear my tenuous mental stability cracking clean down the middle, almost like a thunderstorm rumbling in my ear. Unfazed, the Crown Prince straightened and strolled around the table, flopping into Derek's seat before I could protest. My whole body tensed. Cupping his chin lazily with one hand, he gazed at me with ruby-red eyes. You haven't forgotten your promise already, have you? What do you? The next time we met, you were to give me a detailed explanation of why, how, and when you started to fall for me, he said, repeating precisely the words he'd said as he let me go all those months ago. Of course you've come well prepared. Go on then. I'm listening, he said, nodding in encouragement. The letters above his glorious blonde hair began to blink. Affection score 3%. There was only 3%. One wrong move and he wouldn't even need to lift his sword. It would be game over if the affection score went into negatives. My mind went blank. I don't. No need to be shy now. No one's dropping any eaves on us anyway, he said. He was right. There was no one within a meter's radius all around us. Everyone had distanced themselves, content to watch the meeting between the Duke's barbaric daughter and the rabid dog of the imperial house from a distance. Go on, I said. The Crown Prince prompted again. Well, you see, I felt tears coming to my eyes as I desperately searched for something to say. I know I was afraid for my life, but why did I say something so stupid? I could think of nothing to say. I'd only met him twice now, and there seemed to be not a single thing good about the crazy prince, other than the fact that his hair color was so uniquely vibrant. Hello, the Crown Prince called. His voice grew cold since I was no doubt taking too long. I'm sorry, but I clamped my eyes shut. Oh, I don't know what to do. I don't like you anymore. What? He asked, one of his eyebrows arching upwards. I was afraid he might draw his sword at any moment. My words tumbled out of my mouth, sounding more like I was rapping than speaking. I came to understand that it's only common decency to give up on unrequited love that can never be realized. I'm sorry to have revealed my feelings to you like this, Your Highness. I plan to look for someone more befitting my station, someone who is more on my level. I wasn't really sure what I was saying, the fear making everything a hazy mess. Somehow managing not to stammer, I murmured, I'm sorry for what I said before. I really am. Everyone around us must have heard. My voice rang out loudly, as was my intention. Love was a fickle thing, wasn't it? Though the Crown Prince was unpredictable, He wouldn't try to kill a lady for apologizing so sincerely in front of all these nobles. This game might have the least tangible grasp on reality I'd ever seen, but surely his character couldn't be that unhinged. I was wrong, however. After mentally parsing through everything I'd said, the Crown Prince gave a loud, fake laugh. So you've got another man, is that it? I'm sorry. Who is the son of a bitch? The sound I'd been dreading most rang out, the ringing of his blade as he shot to his feet and drew his sword. Indeed, he was the type of lunatic who would bring a long sword meant for combat to a hunting tournament. Tell me who you whispered sweet nothings to this time, woman. He spat, glaring at me with his ruby eyes. His sword gleamed as he pointed it at me. What the fuck is wrong with this game? I cried inwardly. I'm not a patient man, my lady. You better answer me quickly now. Well, I haven't decided on anyone yet, I replied reluctantly, sweating profusely. Affection score 4%. My answer seemed to be to his liking, since his affection score rose by 1%. But I wasn't at all happy. Despite his score, the Crown Prince was still scowling at me. Tell me, is love such an easy thing to you? Yes, I replied quickly, afraid he'd find something else to criticize if I hesitated too long. I'm rather quick to fall in love. It sounds like there is someone in this empire you find more attractive than me. Ah, it was true. In fact, I'd take anyone over you. I had a feeling that honesty wouldn't be the best policy in this instance, though. Occupied with glancing above his head at the gauge, I was unable to speak. The Crown Prince clutched at his chest with great exaggeration. He did so with the hand that held his sword, no less. Do you know what you're doing to me right now? I've been waiting for this day, unable to sleep at night from anticipation. The blade of the sword hovered dangerously close to his face. As I stared at him as if he were a madman, I heard a familiar voice. What are you doing? My savior had arrived, one of the human shields that had left earlier with no pity for my plight. Brother, it was almost as if I could see a halo around Derek as he approached. Why are you only just coming now? I thought tearfully as I rushed to hide behind him. The prince's red eyes watched me curiously, before he seemed to finally recognize my eldest brother. Ah, if it isn't Lord Derek. I was surprised to see that the eldest Eckhart brother seemed to be harboring some hostility to the Crown Prince. I asked you what you were doing, Your Highness. I was having a private conversation with your sister. With your sword drawn. Oh, this. The Crown Prince glanced at his drawn blade and grinned. This is nothing. You see, some flies were flitting about, perhaps because we're close to the forest. He swung his sword a couple of times in the air, as if he were really trying to swat a non-existent fly, before sheathing his sword once more in a single, smooth motion. From afar he might have appeared impressive, cool even. I simply thought him crazed. Did Penelope disrespect you in some way? Derek asked in his usual cold manner, no doubt wondering at the prince's mental state himself. Disrespect me, the Crown Prince repeated, rubbing his chin. He suddenly clapped his hands together. Indeed she did. She greatly disrespected me. Chapter 62. I didn't, I very nearly shouted, but then clamped my lips closed. I hadn't meant to react so loudly. You're the one who came over here and started picking on me. Derek's head whipped around, his cool blue eyes pinning me in place. The words above his head glittered. Affection score -1%, affection score 25%. I hadn't done anything to deserve a drop in affection score. I shook my head urgently, looking at him with eyes that begged him to understand. No, I didn't do anything. His warning that things wouldn't end with only imprisonment seemed to ring in my ears. He sent a sharp glare at me as I shook my head, then sighed so quietly only I heard him. My sister isn't entirely well yet, Your Highness. She's only recently left her sick, you see. I'm not sure what she's done to offend you, but pray be generous, and she deceived me. Deceived. My jaw dropped as he continued to spew nonsense as if they were facts. She failed to keep a promise we made, and she mocked my feelings for her. I hurriedly tried to intervene and refute the drivel pouring from his lips, but Derek was faster. What do you mean by that? He was frowning in deepening displeasure. The Crown Prince shrugged. Perhaps she doesn't remember. I, on the other hand, remember precisely what my lady whispered to me in the maze garden. Your Highness, I snarled despite myself, interrupting his dramatics. The Duke and my brothers didn't know the truly stupid things I'd said to him. They simply thought I'd been attacked by the Crown Prince for no reason. This won't do. I need to drag this bastard somewhere isolated and knock him out with the crossbow. Plan in place, I spoke quickly. It seems I may have misspoken. I need to speak to you in private. Will you come with me for a moment? And I was about to drag the prince away, no longer able to bear the ludicrous accusations coming from his lips, when a piercing noise rang out. It was the cry of some sort of animal, Someone shrieked loudly, and then the venue was filled with screaming. Everyone turned to look, me included. What is that thing? There was a huge balloon floating in the air, probably as tall as a 2-story building. It reminded me of the giant inflatable duck I'd seen floating on a lake in the real world. Kayawu! Kayawu! Cried the balloon suddenly, and I realized something. Wait a second. It was that strange creature one of the foreigners had released from its cage earlier. The gigantic monster screeched and landed, beginning to waddle about. Kayawu! Kayawu! Oh God! A monster! Get out of the way! The nearby guests screamed and began to scatter, eager to escape from underneath the creature's giant feet. I'd thought the thing cute before, but now its enormous size and screeching cries made me shudder. Please, save me! One of the ladies who'd been running away from the monster had tripped and fallen. Caillou, the woman screamed in fear. The shadow cast by the balloon creature was slowly settling over her now. Damn it, Derek muttered quietly. He darted forward, unsheathing his sword and rushing the monster in an instant. He then plunged his blade into the bottom of the gigantic creature's foot, just as it was about to fall on the woman. Kai! The creature's foot was forced to a stop in midair by the iron wedged against the dirt, hovering just barely off the ground. The sword made an ominous sound, bending dangerously as if it might break at any second. Fortunately, there was more than enough time for Derek to snatch the woman's arm and drag her to safety. She was limp in his hold, no doubt unconscious. A resounding crack indicated the sword had been crushed underfoot. The guards! Call the guards! Someone shouted. Kayawu! Kayawu! The creature seemed enraged by Derek's attack, and the quiet outdoor venue was thrown into chaos. There's the Crown Prince! I heard someone shout amid the chaos, the words carrying oddly clearly. My eyes widened as I turned to find the speaker. Kill him! The woman dressed in black, who I'd seen free the monster, stood among a crowd of people all pointing at the Crown Prince and chanting some kind of spell. The monster turned as if compelled by magic. Shit! It was heading right at me and the Crown Prince. It's not supposed to be this kind of game. What is a monster doing in a dating sim? I froze in place, stunned by the sudden turn of events. Kayawu! Kayawu, the monster, having received its new orders, stamped its feet like a bull readying itself to charge. Your brother seems to value the life of some stranger over that of his only sister. The Crown Prince stepped forward. He'd been standing just watching until then, calm even though the monster had evidently been released for the purpose of killing him. If it were me, I'd never leave my sister alone with someone who'd nearly killed her before, especially amid such danger. What if I found our conversation just now so upsetting that I decided to throw you into the monster's path as a distraction? I stiffened. If he pushed me, I'd be unquestionably trampled to death. Seeing that I was stunned speechless, the Crown Prince grinned. Relax. It was a joke, my lady. I wouldn't do such a thing while everyone was watching. The monster is here for me, so shall I deliver myself to it? I was about to snap at him, demanding to know if he really thought it a proper time to be joking, but he drew his sword and dashed forward much like Derek had just moments earlier. Kayawu! Kayawu! The monster had ceased its stamping and galloped at him. The ground rumbled under the creature's enormous footfalls, and Callisto, rushing at it with an almost impassable speed, launched himself high into the air just as he was about to collide with the creature. He drove his sword into one of its enormous eyes. Kayawu! The monster screeched in pain, flailing, and the Crown Prince's body was tossed about, dangling in midair like a piece of fabric. He'll fall at this rate. I didn't have to worry for long. The prince, who'd been holding onto the sword with one hand, planted his feet on the monster's back, before wrenching his blade along the creature's spine, metal still buried in its flesh. By the time his feet touched down on the ground, the monster had ceased its writhing. Kayawu! The vast body of the monster collapsed into 2 pieces, attached only barely at the top of its head. It flopped limply to the ground, resembling a piece of bubble gum someone had chewed up and spat out. I blinked. It had all happened so fast, having dispatched the monster in a matter of minutes with nobody's help. The Crown Prince turned his ruby eyes on the clear perpetrators of the attack. Strange, he said. The group dressed in black who had been controlling the monster were gathered in a circle. Each was holding a glowing crystal ball, and stood ready to fight so that the few nobles with weapons could not divide and overwhelm them. The strategy was proving effective, as even Derek, who had retrieved the pieces of his broken sword from nearby, hung back without approaching. The woman he'd rescued from the monster had vanished. The Crown Prince said as if to himself as he eyed the group, "Why is it so quiet? The guards should have arrived by now." Those of the nobles who had taken cover a distance away began to murmur to one another. He was right. There was no way the guards had failed to notice something was wrong with all this noise, even if they hadn't been summoned. It was very odd that none of the guards had arrived at all, if reinforcements weren't going to arrive any time soon. That made this the perfect time for the attackers to strike, since most of the guests did not have any weapons save for the few individuals like Derek and the Crown Prince, who had come armed. "Don't be so sure of victory just yet, Callisto Regulus," shouted one of the individuals dressed in black. The voice was husky and male. I'd assumed they were a woman based on the person's diminutive frame, but apparently I'd been wrong. "You will not escape with your life. Ah, remnants of the holy nation of Layla, I never thought you'd stoop so low as to disguise yourselves in Cetina clothing." Cetina was a small desert kingdom far away from Aoka. It appeared the Crown Prince had identified them accurately, since the assailants in black seemed to flinch as if caught red-handed. I couldn't be sure, but I guessed they were from one of the countries that had been defeated by Aoka in the war. "It can't have been easy to get past the inspections." "Who helped you?" asked the Crown Prince. "A monster like you must not become emperor," the man cried, ignoring the question. The Crown Prince looked puzzled. "Why not?" Callisto asked, his tone suggesting he was genuinely curious as to why he couldn't. His puzzled response triggered great fury amongst them. "You have caused tens of thousands of deaths with your war. Do you not fear divine punishment, you God-forsaken heathen?" "Well, I don't know about that. I'd be more concerned about my own actions if I were you, seeing as you're the ones who were responsible for using humans as test subjects, and then feeding them to monsters after all." "Shut your mouth. Why, if I heard correctly, you even kidnapped magically inclined children recently only to abuse them. All done in the name of the great goddess Layla. Only when the filth who defy our God is wiped out will the true emperor rise." That phrase tickled my memory. I'd heard something similar from Winter. Some of the heretic groups have made the absurd claim that only when all magic users are gone will the true emperor, ordained by the gods, be born. So these are the people Winter was talking about. I examined them more closely following this realization. The Crown Prince continued in a mocking tone. "So how are you feeling about the Jur clan these days? You know they thanked me most enthusiastically for usurping your unwanted occupation of their country. How dare those trifling worms reject our holy nation?" "You know what, I don't actually care to hear it," the prince said as he raised his hand to halt the zealots ranting. "You'll all die by my hand today, regardless, just like that monster you brought." With those chilling words, he drew his gigantic sword and held it level with his glinting red eyes. Chapter 63. A chilling, bloodthirsty aura emanated from the Crown Prince in waves. He looked ready to pounce and annihilate the group in black, just as he had the monster. "He really is a war hero, huh?" I'd known that he was a lunatic, but it seemed that he was even more dangerous and terrifying than even I'd imagined. I watched the confrontation with mixed feelings. "You're the one who will die," shouted the zealot. Then he laughed creepily and screamed, "Look behind you." There was an odd, fleshy ripping sound, and the man in black pointed as the frightening noise filled the air. "What the hell is that?" someone shouted. All eyes traveled to where the man was pointing. Everyone could hear that same fleshy ripping again. The monster, split in two by the Crown Prince save for the top portion of its head, was tearing the last few strands holding it together apart. With a final wet rip, its body, which was very sticky, stretched and split into two different pieces. Kayawu, there were now two monsters instead of one. How do you like the vitality given by a god?" The man in black cried, snickering at the shocked disgust on the crowd's faces. "You can cut it down all you like. It will only keep multiplying." Someone screamed dramatically. I have never seen a monster like that before. Despite mostly calming when the Crown Prince had defeated the creature, the crowd now descended into frenzied screaming and shouting again. They rushed toward the single exit to the venue, but no one was able to actually leave. There seemed to be some kind of unseen barrier that didn't allow anyone to pass through. The wall of brush that surrounded the garden was smooth and high, so few could even attempt to scale it. The two monsters began chasing the guests, who were unsuccessfully trying to flee. Kayawu, Kayawu. Gigantic chicken feet stomped around, destroying the soft grass under its heavy steps. The Crown Prince and Derek exchanged a silent look before each charging at a different monster. Other nobles in possession of weapons joined the attack, including Reynold. It was no use, however, as every monster that they defeated only multiplied. More and more people were getting hurt in the process. A woman screamed near me, "Somebody help us." "Oh God," someone else shouted. Brief respite over, the garden was a hotbed of chaos once more. What in the world is going on? I thought, staring around me in shock. I had no idea where the Duke was, and the way everyone was fleeing from the monsters that chased them reminded me of a demented game of tag. I stood alone in the middle of the chaos, feeling very much like none of this was real. As screams and cries filled the air, I spotted someone standing alone in the distance, just as I was. Winter. I didn't have time to wonder how he, a mage, had managed to get inside. "Please, save me." A man directly next to Winter was being attacked by a monster. Why isn't he getting out of the way? I wondered. At the same time, I noticed that he had one hand shoved in the folds of his coat. I realized he was conflicted, wanting to remove the staff hidden beneath his clothing to save the people around him, but at the risk of revealing that he was a mage. Why is he considering helping at all? He had nothing to gain from revealing himself. Not only that, but this entire incident had been masterminded by the very group who persecuted mages. No matter how good a person you are, how can you take that kind of risk for others? I felt strange as I watched him struggling to decide, remembering the masked children I'd seen at the Guild of the White Rabbit. I didn't want him to reveal that he was a mage. I wanted him to keep it a secret until the end. However, Winter seemed to have arrived at a decision that was contrary to my wishes. His hand twitched as if he were about to draw something from his robe, when a voice cried out, "Penelope." Hearing my name, Winter looked over and our eyes met. His navy pupils slowly widened as he recognized me. I looked away from him though, realizing that something was wrong. "Kyowu." "Kyowu." I turned, only to find one of the balloon monsters charging at me, the ground rumbling under its pounding footsteps. "Penelope, run!" Reynolds shouted. He was behind the monster, sprinting as fast as he could to catch up, the veins in his neck visible from the strain. Time seemed to slow down as Derek and Callisto turned to me, faces pale as they fought other monsters, unable to help. At that moment, my vision was filled with a flash of brilliant light. System. Main quest, become the queen of the hunt. First objective, save people from danger. Rewards, plus 5% affection score for all love interests, plus 50 reputation. Accept/decline. The quest I'd refused had popped up again. I laughed, speechless. So I had no choice but to accept the quest. In the end, I thought cynically. New letters appeared in my vision. System. This main quest will be auto-accepted in 5 seconds. System. 5. System. 4. Back when I'd played the game in the real world, the main quests had been unavoidable since they were needed for the progression of the story. Having to experience it firsthand like this, however, left me in a foul mood. If I had just been playing the game on my phone, all I'd have to do was accept the quest, and I'd instantly get a notification that said, "The monsters have been defeated." A simulation game was composed of illustrations and dialogue, so couldn't be expected to depict much in the way of action after all. But sadly, this was no game, it was reality. Reality. Kyowu. I had no other choice. The monster was nearly on top of me, and all the main players in the story were staring at me. I managed to press the accept button right as the monster was bearing down on me. The moment I did so, my body moved of its own accord. My right hand grabbed the crossbow strung across my back, easily swinging it up and over my shoulder at a speed that I knew I wasn't capable of moments earlier. I supported the tiller with my left hand and pulled the trigger without hesitating. The crossbow clicked as it released the string, twanging. Kyowu. The metal pellet buried itself in the hard foot of the creature, and the monster fell onto its back, its entire body convulsing. Kyowu. It fell limp, and its opaque, rubbery body suddenly liquefied and pooled like melted ice cream. What was that? The men and women draped in black gaped, struggling to believe what had happened to their monster. They weren't the only ones stunned and standing still. My love interests and the other guests were frozen, gawping in shock. The danger they were in completely forgotten. What the hell? Of course, I was more shocked than all of them combined. I'd been so flustered by the chaos that I'd forgotten I even had the crossbow. The Duke's daughter, she shot the... As those around me tried to wrap their heads around what had happened, my body spun around. Of course, my movements were not my own. I easily went down on one knee and aimed the crossbow again, then fired. The click and twang of the crossbow were followed by a dying screech. The monster that had been attacking the man near Winter quivered and fell. I couldn't confirm if it melted away too, because my body was already in motion, standing and aiming the crossbow yet again. The bowstring made a satisfying sound as I fired once more. Kyowu. Every shot I took was immaculate, and the monsters fell one by one, even as they still attempted to hunt their prey. I remained in the game's iron control, moving without any conscious thought. "Kill that girl." Quickly, one of the zealots screamed, pointing at me. The multiplied horde of monsters that had scattered all around the venue began converging on me. It was better this way since when they were spread out, I had to keep pivoting to line up a shot. There was something deeply satisfying about the click, twang, and then thump of the monsters. The bowstring made a satisfying sound as I fired again. I shot like a woman possessed. Before long I was killing the last two as they rushed at me, and all the monsters were dead. They hadn't multiplied as much as I thought they had, and their enormous size made them easy targets. I huffed and gasped with exertion, finally lowering my crossbow, trying to catch my breath. My arms trembled violently. I wasn't even able to lift the crossbow properly when I was practicing at home. Holding it up for such a prolonged period left me feeling like my arms were about to fall off. This isn't a quest. This is torture. I looked around, blinking tears from my eyes. An eerie silence had fallen over the garden, its occupants all staring at me uncomprehendingly, including the culprits responsible for this mess. Looks like I'll be known as the superstar chimpanzee again this year, I thought with a hollow laugh. Some of those nearest flinched hearing me laugh, but then I began to hear scattered applause. Slowly, the clapping grew to a thunderous roar. "My God, Lady Penelope saved us," someone exclaimed. "Oh my goodness, if my lady hadn't been here, thank you so much, my lady, you saved our lives." I was astounded at the sudden outpour of loud cheering. Another window popped up in front of me then. System, main quest, become the queen of the hunt. First objective, save people from danger successful. System, you have gained affection score plus 5% for all male protagonists, and A plus 50 reputation as your reward. Total reputation, 80, the reputation I didn't really care for or need had soared. Whoa, I wish the affection scores would go up like that. 5% for all love interests wasn't too bad, though as a reward for my efforts. This meant the Crown Prince's affection score, the one that posed the most threat to me, was a little farther away from causing my death. Though I was exhausted from being used like a puppet by the game, I found the rewards to be quite generous. Despite the crowd of people surrounding me, I could find my various love interests thanks to the white letters above their heads. Affection score 27% first. Reynold was closest to me thanks to his mad attempted dash to my rescue. Affection score 30%. Affection score 9%. Then there were Derek and Callisto. Affection score 20%. And finally Winter. Unlike the unimportant extras, who were showering me with thanks and praise, the male protagonists were all just staring blankly, not approaching. If I were the heroine from normal mode, they'd have rushed to me with devotion in their eyes. Come to think of it, none of them had tried to protect me, not even my adoptive brothers. I wasn't all that disappointed though. I don't need them. Affection score 60%. I'd already chosen which male protagonist would win me my escape. Chapter 64. Why was it that backup always only arrived when things were already basically wrapped up? I watched as the guards rushed in through the garden's only entrance. There were 3 or 4 men wearing gold robes among the regular guards in silver armor, the palace mages. They quickly moved between the partially liquefied monsters and confirmed they were all dead. This type of beast is weak to magical attacks and almost never used for battle. The mages were implying that the attackers had only brought this particular monster, capable of multiplying infinitely, because they knew mages were forbidden from attending the hunting tournament. Very few nobles chose to come armed to the event. Most of them were dressed elegantly, not expecting a battle. Because of the inspections before entry, guests in possession of magical weapons were even rarer. The aristocrats took pride in using only non-magical weapons during the yearly hunting tournament. They preferred to win using only their intuition and skill, without the aid of an enchanted weapon. This was why only my crossbow, with its shark magic, had worked against the creatures. The situation had worked out very conveniently for me, no doubt thanks to the game's carefully constructed backstory. But how did Winter get in? I wondered again. Unfortunately, there was no way to know, perhaps because they'd expended great energy trying to control the monsters. The robed figures did not put up much of a fight. Trapped without any hope of escape, they were soon rounded up by the guards. Let go of me. Do you not fear the wrath of the guards, you heathens? Curious about who was responsible for this mess, I watched from a distance. The Crown Prince was moving between the attackers, roughly wrenching the cloths away that covered each of their faces. This isn't over, Callisto Regulus. Their leader, as one might expect, was an old woman. As the faces of the 5 remaining figures were revealed, I was shocked to see that they were 3 bone-thin girls, and 2 young boys who looked to be only 10 or so. "The guards are watching, you atrocious heathen. We will tear you limb from limb and restore our destroyed kingdom." The old woman spat curses at the crown prince, struggling with no signs of tiring. Callisto was calm in the face of her violent threats. In fact, he waved a dismissive hand, wearing a bored expression. The old leader and the women were dragged away by the knights, leaving the 2 mangy children. The knights made to take them away as well, but the crown prince raised a hand. He regarded the captain of the guard. "Why were you so late?" "Well, you see, there was a powerful magical barrier surrounding the entire venue. We summoned the mages as soon as we could to try and break the spell, but it was too strong." The man trailed off, clearly stricken with guilt. The crown prince didn't seem too bothered, however. It must have been the work of these 2. His frightening red eyes landed on the children. If they had been normal children, they would have no doubt been terrified to be accused of such. But these children did not react despite the great many eyes watching them. Something was disturbing about the way their empty gazes stared into space. "Search them," Callisto commanded. The guards hurried to roughly search the children. It wasn't long before one of the knights shouted, "I found a magical amplifier." The knight was referring to the tiny black chips attached to the skin behind the children's ears. "Magical amplifiers, does that mean they are mages?" The palace mages carefully removed the chips, and the children, who were still not resisting in any way, suddenly slumped to the ground like puppets whose strings had been cut. I flinched, surprised, but the crown prince had no mercy for even children. "Take them to the underground prison," he commanded. "Yes, my lord." The knights took the children by their collars and were about to drag them away when someone stepped in front of them. "Please, just a moment." It was Winter, his silver hair shifting gently in the night breeze. "What is it, Marquis Verdandi? Your Highness, please leave these children in my care," Winter requested with a deep bow as he stood in front of the children. The crown prince tilted his head. "Why, they have obviously been subjected to long-term hypnosis and are incapable of thinking for themselves. And I can reverse the brainwashing. I believe it would be beneficial to recover their memories and perhaps learn the enemy's location rather than executing innocent victims, as was the case during the kidnapping on Viscount Hale's estate." Winter was the picture of calm composure as he pleaded his case as to why he should be allowed to take the children. However, it wasn't hard to see how desperate he was to save them. After all, he hadn't hesitated to threaten me, a lady of House Eckhart, to protect the children he'd rescued from the Anti-Magic Association. "Marquis, this is much more serious than a simple kidnapping," replied the crown prince, his voice as cutting as a knife. "These people attacked the imperial palace. Anyone involved will be executed without exception. But your highness, it is too cruel to punish them equally when they were recruited against their will. Pray have mercy and enough. Take them away." Clearly not wanting to hear any more, the crown prince cut Winter off. Winter watched, openly devastated, as the children were dragged away. Why is he so determined? I suddenly wondered. However, I remembered the children in animal masks, and I couldn't bring myself to look down on him for wanting to save them. The knights were making their way through the crowd, the children in tow, when I moved gracefully into their path. I agree with Marquis Verdandi. Everyone turned to stare when they heard my quiet voice, including Winter, the crown prince, and my 2 brothers. 2 sets of blue eyes resting on my face seemed particularly caustic, those of a stiff Derek and a scowling Reynold. I could feel them both silently demanding I not cause any more trouble. I ignored them and spoke. "Your Highness, please allow the Marquis to take the children and cure them of the brainwashing." "What?" the crown prince asked, his eyebrows twitching upwards in surprise. I glanced at the letters simmering above his blonde head, which were starting to blink, and replied slowly, "It's clear to me that they were abused. I don't think they deserve to be executed." I gestured at the children, whose collars were still fisted in the knight's hands. The fabric of their shirts was gaping open around their collarbones, revealing the skin around their throats covered with bruises and scars. The crowd began murmuring to one another, finally noticing the poor state of the children, and I could feel sympathy for them growing. "Huh," laughed the crown prince coldly. His red eyes gleamed unpleasantly, as if to tell me he was very displeased with my intervention. "Since when did the Duke's daughter get any say in the nation's affairs? Don't I get to say at least this much, since I'm the one who killed all the monsters?" I asked, turning to peer around the garden at the palace attendants as they struggled to remove the melted corpses littering the ruined grass. I was embarrassed to have to point it out, but we were surrounded by the evidence of my incredible deed. The crown prince's mouth snapped shut, and he glared at me. "Of course you have nothing to say to that." His affection score blinked precariously. so I quickly bowed and repeated my demand disguised as a request. "They are just children. Please be merciful, Your Highness." I wasn't trying to help Winter necessarily, nor was I an especially kind-hearted soul. It was just that I found it hard to watch these mangy children being marched to their death, abandoned after they'd ceased to be useful. That was why I'd intervened, though it wasn't like me. I could feel the Crown Prince's stinging glare. Finally he spoke. "Tie them up and place them in Marquis Verdandy's carriage," he ordered reluctantly. My gaze immediately darted up to check his affection score, and found that it hadn't dropped from 9%. As relief washed over me, a white window appeared. "System, your reputation has improved. You've gained +10 reputation points as a result. Total 90, though it hadn't been my intention, my reputation had increased again." I stared in blank surprise at the message. I was woken from my daze by the words of the Crown Prince. "I never would have expected such kind-heartedness from you, my lady." His tone was one of pure sarcastic mockery. "I had intended to reward you, but I suppose that won't be necessary now." He strode past me. "Tusk, such a petty man. I don't need a reward from you anyway." I grumbled inwardly as my eyes followed his retreating figure. Suddenly an odd feeling washed over me. Affection score 10%. His affection score had risen by 1%. Well, I suppose this episode is over without any dire consequences this time, at least. Though the rampaging monster had taken me by surprise, I was fairly content with the results. Not only had the Crown Prince's affection score risen unexpectedly, I thought it likely that the hunting tournament would be cancelled after today's events. Please let things continue like this, and I don't want to see one of those main quests ever again. Even if another one appeared, I wasn't going to accept any more. Aside from how uncomfortable it was to lose control of my own body, it was just too much for me to handle. After the Crown Prince was gone and some of the tension had left me, I found that my body ached all over. "I need to lie down now. I'll die if I don't." Glancing around, I saw that the situation seemed to be under control. There were some injured in the process of being carried away on stretchers, but thankfully, no one seemed to have died. "I need to find Emily." I didn't know where the lodge was, but I didn't want to deal with my 2 elder brothers, who had suddenly vanished from sight. Because access to the venue had been sealed off to anyone but the guards, I had to go outside to locate Emily. After recounting their versions of events to the palace guards and mages, the other nobles began to trickle out through the main gate. I slung my crossbow over my shoulder and trudged along the garden path, intending to follow when a voice called out, "Lady Penelope, Chapter 65. I turned slowly when I heard someone calling my name. I wasn't all that surprised. It was only natural given the flow of the game's plot that one of the love interests would come to find me now. The event had begun at sunset, meaning the garden was now blanketed by the dark night sky. The monsters had destroyed most of the lanterns, but the few that remained dimly lit the person who'd called my name's face. Despite the lack of visibility, I never had any trouble identifying love interests, even in the dark. "Affection score 20%, Marquis," I said. It felt awkward since I'd never addressed him this way before. I was pretty haughty the last time we met. Since we were no longer wearing masks, behaving that way now would be a disaster. While I was occupied with how awkward his title sounded in my head, Winter approached me with quick, sure steps. Unlike his title, the color of his eyes was familiar to me. "Thank you very much for your help today," he said with a polite bow. "Well, I can't say I didn't expect this. Fairly used to the way things unfolded in hard mode by now," I replied offhandedly. "I didn't interfere for your sake, Marquis. You don't need to thank me." The words came out smoothly, despite how awkward I felt about the whole thing. "Yes, I'm grateful for your help in that as well, but, at great personal cost, you managed to save everyone, including myself." Head still bowed, his eyes found the hands that I was holding carefully at my sides. I glanced down as well, and my eyes slowly widened as I realized what he was saying. My hands were trembling intermittently, without me realizing it. "He's right. I worked myself too hard. Ordinarily, my arms were not strong enough to wield a crossbow. However, I wasn't trembling only from exertion. Though I was desperately pretending I was unaffected, I'd been completely terrified. The shadow from the monster's gigantic foot when it was about to squash me, the countless monsters that had converged on me, my hands moving like lightning, completely out of my control. It was enough to make me want to clamp my eyes shut against the terrible scenes replayed in my mind. Doing my best to bury my emotions, I hid my quivering hands behind my back. "I'm sure anyone would have done the same in my place. Please don't worry about—" "No," Winter interrupted my desperate attempt at pretending I was okay. "There is no one here as brave as you, my lady. even though the monster was so easy to kill. He trailed off, frowning like a tormented man. Does he feel guilty for not revealing himself and doing nothing about the monsters? I couldn't really understand why it was bothering him so much. What was wrong with being a little selfish if it was for your own safety? He'd done what he needed to do under the circumstances. Just as I'd given control to the system to save my own life, as well as that of everybody else. We each did the best we could in the given situation. There's nothing more to be said, is there? I said and shrugged easily. I would have run away just like everyone else if I didn't happen to have my crossbow on hand. You also did your best to save the children, didn't you? I couldn't have spoken to the Crown Prince like that. He scares me. I was amused by how perfectly true my words were. If Winter hadn't come forward first, and I hadn't also just killed all those monsters, I wouldn't have dared to cross the Crown Prince as I did. His quiet navy eyes shimmered as he watched me laughing to myself. Then I saw a change in his affection score 24%. The letters blinked softly above his head. 4%. The large increase instantly returned me to my senses. He'll abandon me as soon as he meets the female protagonist. Anyway, nothing good will come of meeting with him. The smile slowly faded from my lips. Thank you for your compliments. If you'll excuse me, I said, hurriedly bringing the conversation to an end. I was too tired to stand any longer. Come to think of it, Winter's the only one who bothered to thank me for saving him. It was a shame that he wasn't a viable option, since he was the most normal of the bunch. I turned away with a brief bow when he spoke. My lady. Warm palms grasped at my arm, and when I turned in shock, Winter was watching me with an unreadable look on his face. I received the message you sent me. He hesitated for a moment, then whispered so only I could hear, May I also repay you in kind for helping me tonight? Someone suddenly shouted my name in the distance. Penelope. The voice was as stiff as rigor mortis. Affection score 27%. The darkness made his affection score easier to see than his face, but his disgruntled voice was easy enough to recognize. Excuse me. What are you doing with my sister? Reynold, I said. It seemed today was the department meeting for all the male love interests, and it was Reynolds' turn now. I thought he'd already left without me. When I'd tried grabbing his sleeve earlier, he had shaken me off coldly, but his timing was immaculate now. I was surprised to see the pink-haired man staring between me and Winter in turn. Come here, Penelope, Reynold ordered, warily eyeing Winter, who was still holding my arm. Winter didn't let go of me, however, and Reynolds' scowl deepened. Why am I getting a sense of déjà vu? I was reminded of a similar standoff that had occurred recently at the training grounds. Caught between them, I glanced cautiously at both before softly shaking my arm. Marquis, I started. Unlike my other love interests, Winter wasn't holding me tightly. I'd be able to free myself if I shoved him with all my strength, just as I'd done to Derek and Eccles, but I didn't want to go so far as pushing the only male protagonist who was actually polite to me. Marquis, I tried again, peering up at him with wide eyes. Still, Winter made no move to release me. She's telling you to let go, Reynold said angrily. Are you refusing to release her? The ever-hot-tempered Reynold gritted his teeth. He made to stomp over and pull me away, but Winter's hands were already slipping from my arm, his grip going limp as though he'd reluctantly resigned himself to let go. Reynold snatched me up as soon as Winter released his hold, shoving me behind him like he was trying to hide me. Now that I was tucked safely behind him, his lips twisted into a grin and he began marking Winter. Look here, Marquis. You seem to think my innocent sister is easy prey, but do remember your age, hum. My jaw dropped at his audacious rudeness, and I'd already punched him in the shoulder before I even realized I was moving. Are you insane? It wasn't like that. You be quiet. Girls shouldn't act so brash, Reynold shouted. I felt a wave of irritation wash over me. If you're going to say that kind of garbage, let go of me. I'll leave by myself, I said coldly, twisting my hand free. He seemed flustered and scrambled after me, shouting back at Winter. Anyhow, stay away from her from now on. You've got no chance with her. Ugh, seriously, I mumbled. All right, let's go, darn it. You and your temper. Reynold grumbled, charging ahead of us as though I was the one who'd been delaying him. I should be the one saying that. The curse words I wanted to spit at him were on the tip of my tongue, having to hear him criticizing my temper. But I swallowed them back, since I could still feel a pair of eyes gazing at the back of my head. As I was practically dragged away by Reynold, I glanced behind me. Winter was standing in the same spot, watching me leave. He spoke when our eyes met. I'll be waiting for your reply, my lady. He was more tenacious than I expected him to be. I slowed to a halt, watching him with wide eyes. Reynold had also turned and shrieked, Enough, damn it. She won't ever be sending you a reply, so don't. No, please don't, I cut Reynold off, addressing Winter. My brother's terrifying tongue finally fell silent, perhaps only because I was refusing Winter. I believe I informed the messenger that I wasn't interested in receiving any response. I said, reminding him of what I'd said all that time ago with a smile. I hadn't been able to smile at him when I'd been wearing the mask. His navy eyes shimmered once more. Affection score 26%, I'd noticed this before, but it always surprised me that his affection score tended to rise when I refused him outright. Reynold all but dragged me out of the venue, and before long I heard voices in the distance. My lady, Penelope, Emily and the Duke, who'd been crowded nervously around the entrance, Roman 6. Sibley brightened when they saw me and approached at a run. Are you all right, my lady? You're not hurt anywhere, are you, Penelope? I just stood there as they both examined me up and down, confused at the unexpected welcome. I'm all right, and I am unhurt, I ensured. There's no need to worry about her. I guess you didn't get to see her wipe out those. Reynold began in his usual sarcastic tone, but shut up very quickly when the Duke glared at him with a hiss. The disgruntled look on his face was deeply satisfying. I turned my attention to the Duke again. You're not hurt, are you, father? Emily, thankfully, I was outside when the attack began since I was briefly visiting the lodge, said the Duke. I'm okay too, thanks to the errand you sent me on, Emily said. That's good. What about Derek? He went with the Crown Prince to interrogate the prisoners. I didn't actually care where he'd gone but thought it was only polite to ask. I'm so relieved you weren't hurt. Do you know how worried I was when I heard what was happening? The Duke certainly seemed deeply concerned, fretting over me and peering down with a distressed expression. Chapter 66. I found the Duke's concerned reaction quite strange, and was only able to smile awkwardly in response. Sorry to have made you worry. Things just happened so fast. Those bastards, how dare they? The Duke, seemingly relieved to see that I was unhurt, suddenly exploded with rage. I'll set our soldiers after them as soon as we get home. I'll capture them all and break all their bones before wiping them from the... Father, I called softly, cutting him off. I had a feeling that if I didn't head him off now, he would launch into a detailed explanation of his plans to wipe out the remnants of the holy nation of Layla. I'm really tired. I'd like some rest. Right, of course. Let's go then. That crossbow must be heavy. Give it to me. Thankfully, upon hearing my request, the Duke immediately began moving across the lawn. I had no intention of letting the Duke carry my crossbow, however. I'll carry it, my lady. Please give it to me. To my relief, Emily offered to take it when she saw my reluctance. Thank you, Emily. It was getting so heavy, I thought my arm might fall off. I smiled playfully, slinging the crossbow strap over my head and handing it to her. I hadn't realized how much it was weighing me down when it was on my back, but I felt so much lighter without it. Tursky. Penelope Eckhart, don't get yourself mixed up in anything like this ever again, the Duke ordered, glancing over at me. You should have hidden until the guards arrived. A young lady shouldn't be so fearless in the face of danger. I thought I was going to faint when I heard what you did from the nobles who came out before you. But I did a pretty good job, father, I said, the Duke's disapproving nagging causing me to pout. I learned a lot from the teacher you assigned me. Thanks to those lessons, I was able to defeat all those monsters. The reality was I had been helped by the game system, but regardless, the final outcome was the same. I was tonight's hero. Come on, compliment me when I do a good job for once. How long until they stop treating me like a pariah or just a troublemaker? I was unhappy with the state of things, but wasn't holding on to any hope that things might change. It was hard to change people's perceptions once they were set after all. There were those who'd seen me defeating the monsters with their own eyes who still didn't trust me. No doubt there were also many who believed that I'd just gotten lucky. They are not exactly wrong to be suspicious, though it was the system that was on my side, not luck. In that case, the Duke said, suddenly stopping in his tracks, I'm very proud that you are my daughter, Penelope. There was an unexpected smile stretched across his face. The feeling of someone patting me on the shoulder, whether as encouragement or praise, was deeply unfamiliar. I was left feeling a strange storm of emotions. There were a total of 5 separate tents, pitched on the portion of the campground, assigned to the House of Eckhart. They were huge, luxurious tents, all of them indicative of the house's great wealth and influence. No matter how comfortable they attempted to be, however, the campground was only meant to be used as temporary lodgings, as it posed some uncomfortable logistics for any lady. The Duke kept offering to secure a room for me in the palace if I wanted as we made our way to the tents. I'm all right, father, I said. Staying in the palace was more trouble than it was worth. The hunting grounds located in the forest were pretty far from the main palace, and I'd have to travel quite the distance by carriage. I'd have preferred to just be sent home, but apparently they were still interrogating the attackers, and the fate of the hunting tournament had yet to be decided. Please, game, please let it be cancelled, I prayed earnestly. I'd already had more than my fill of the male love interests. The way the tents were set up in a circle around the campfire was reminiscent of camping sites I'd seen in the real world. Under normal circumstances, I might have lingered and had a look around, but I was feeling faint from fatigue. Father, I'm going to go to bed now. Of course, rest well. I parted ways with the Duke as soon as we arrived at the campground. This way, my lady, Emily said. My accommodation was the one furthest from the entrance. I was about to follow Emily when I noticed Reynold also parting ways with the Duke. Is he staying in the one next to mine? If the hunting tournament went ahead as planned, I'd end up running into him the most often, the guy who marked me at every opportunity. I found myself praying once more, this time that such a thing wouldn't come to pass. Reynold continued to follow me, however, even after I had arrived in front of my tent. I frowned slightly and turned to face him. What do you want? What? He asked. Why do you keep following me? Don't be absurd. I'm not following you. He began raging at me. He pointed to the accommodation next to the one assigned to me and said, That's mine. My worries had been well-founded apparently. Tudding inwardly, I replied glumly, Good night then. I turned to follow Emily when he called, Hey, wait. He stepped in my path, preventing me from leaving. I grimaced. What is it this time? Why are you in such a hurry? I'm not trying to start a fight. I'm tired. If you have something to say, then say it quickly. I snapped irritably, but uncharacteristically he seemed hesitant to say what was on his mind. What's his problem? Even Emily noticed something odd was brewing, tactfully retreating into the tent. I turned to leave again when he remained silent. If you've nothing to say, I'm leaving. Damn it, you've got a cut right there, you idiot. Reynold exclaimed, grabbing me and pointing at my neck. A cut? I asked, puzzled. Reynold used his finger to cautiously prod at the area, so softly that I barely felt it. Right there. Oh, I said, automatically surprised. There was a slight prick of pain that I somehow hadn't noticed before. Did that hurt? I'd cried out in reflex when he'd prodded at the wound, and Reynold, who was clearly surprised, flinched. It hadn't really hurt that much. If the wound had been serious, I'd have probably noticed it before then. It seemed I'd gotten a little scratch while I was busy fighting the monsters. I'm fine. It doesn't hurt that much, I said truthfully. Reynold, however, grimaced as if he was the one in pain. Give me a moment. He then rummaged around in his pocket, taking something from it after a short search. It was a small, flat container. What's that? Ointment. I was surprised that he had something like that in his possession. You carry that around with you? I got it from the infirmary myself. This made me pause. I realized that I'd politely asked after the Duke, Emily, and even Derek, who hadn't been present. But I'd said nothing to Reynold. Realizing my mistake, I cautiously asked, Were you hurt earlier? He sighed, looking at me with deep pity like I was beyond any hope of saving. With another deep sigh, he said, I went to the infirmary for you, idiot. I don't need any. Stay still. He opened the cap and scooped some of the sticky green liquid out with his finger. It smelled nasty, and I backed away uncertainly. He followed me, grumbling grumpily. I said, Stay still. It'll get in your hair. I froze hearing this, and he bent over me, rubbing the sticky ointment over the scratch on my neck. Reynolds' face was very close to mine, and I could feel his breath ghosting over my nose and lips. Dazed, I stood there stiffly as he applied the cold ointment. It felt odd. Did that bastard notice you were hurt? He didn't, did he? He suddenly asked. After a moment's hesitation, I replied, The bastard. That old guy. I tried to recall how old Winter was supposed to be in the game. 25, was it? Or maybe 26, though the age gap wasn't all that big. It was true that he was the oldest of the love interests. However, the only person that needed to worry about the age gap was the female protagonist, since considering how things would develop in the future, I couldn't afford to become close with Winter, nor could I make an enemy of him. That's a rude thing to say about the Marquis, I scolded, recalling how impolitely he'd behaved earlier. Reynolds' handsome face contorted into a frown, inches from my own. Rude. I wasn't rude. Why'd you take the crossbow with you anyway? You should have shot him for trying to hit on you. He isn't that kind of person. And how do you know that? Men are all the same, you dunce, he said crankily, tugging on my hair with his free hand. Oh, I yelled, glaring at him. You asshole, what did you say? Are you talking back to me? I hadn't meant to yell at him, but Reynolds didn't actually seem all that angry. He grinned playfully and straightened, the whisper of his breath vanishing from my nose. Tell that maid of yours to put a bandage on it. he said, gazing at my wound. He appeared to be finished treating me. Who'd have thought the day he tended to me like this would come? We'd been at each other's throats not too long ago, after all. A laugh escaped me despite myself as I thought about it. Thank you, Reynold. Though he was usually a spiteful person, he'd helped me. I could thank him with sincerity for that much at least. At that moment, Reynolds' expression suddenly went curiously blank. His cheeks flushed red like they had when he delivered his sudden apology on the way to the training grounds. "I don't," he stammered. I don't need anything from you, least of all thanks," he hollered, whipping around and storming to his lodge. What's his problem now? Then the space above his roughly bouncing pink hair flickered. Affection score 31%. My eyes slowly widened in surprise. Reynolds' hopeless affection score had somehow risen above normal mode's base score. Chapter 67. What? I exclaimed. We were having breakfast in the Duke's tent. My face twisted into an expression of surprise at the news Derek had just delivered. He'd finished interrogating the attackers, but they had lasted deep into the night. But why? Why is it going ahead as planned after what happened yesterday? No one died, and we are hosting visitors from other kingdoms. If the hunting tournament was to be called off, think of what it would do to the Empire's reputation. Derek replied bluntly. What does the reputation of the Empire matter in the face of a monster rampaging about? I gaped, stunned. Good. Showing hesitation in response to such a trivial matter will only give trifling individuals cause to hold us in contempt. The Duke nodded gravely. Damn it. This isn't what I wanted. I'd been expecting to return home after only a night here, not for the hunting tournament to go ahead as if nothing had happened. I chewed my lip, scrambling to think of an alternative plan. I don't feel well. I don't think I'm up to taking part in the tournament, I said. Of course. Yesterday was a very taxing ordeal for you. The Duke conceded immediately, much to my relief. This is an opportunity for you to re-establish your position in high society, Penelope. It just so happens, Countess Dorothea sent her maid over early this morning. What, Countess Dorothea? She requested that you attend the tea party to be held at the opening of the hunt. As I'd never been to a personal tea party after entering this world, the invitation was puzzling to me. The Duke, however, looked very pleased for reasons unknown to me. You'll be bored if you just stay in your tent all day. Put on a nice dress, enjoy the tea party, and socialize with other young ladies your age for once. She only packed hunting clothes, father, Reynolds said in between bites of food, laughing mockingly. How did he know that? I didn't feel particularly offended by his words, since they were true. I'd known how irritating it would be to wear an unwieldy dress while trudging through the forest, so I told Emily to pack only casual clothes and hunting outfits. As I stared at Reynolds questioningly, the Duke began to scold him. All the better then. An enterprising woman is the norm these days, you dunce. Tusk, he also added, this is why you're so unpopular with the ladies. What do you mean I'm unpopular? Reynolds replied quickly, but the Duke had already turned away from him to regard me instead. I relished the sight of him sitting there, fuming and unable to talk back. Who knows? Maybe one of these louts will have been taken with your bravery last night and offer you their game. You may end up the queen of the hunt yet. Father, that's enough, Derek, who had been eating silently until then, finally said with a sigh. His blue eyes ghosted over me for only a moment. If you start bragging about such an improbable outcome, it will only lead to people gossiping about you even worse than before. People are only just starting to notice how much better behaved she seems these days. Ahem. The Duke cleared his throat, resuming his meal. Apparently, he couldn't refute his son's statement. I was stupefied that he'd come for me so thoroughly mid-meal, when I hadn't said or done anything to invite such a dressing down. In fact, Derek's words offended me more than Reynolds' constant nitpicking. Improbable. I have no desire to be the queen of the hunt anyway. I glared at him indignantly, but Derek didn't look at me. You bastard. You're disqualified. Clenching my trembling fists under the table, I vowed I'd have my revenge. My lady, are you sure it's okay to go out dressed like that? Emily said, looking over my outfit with an unsatisfied expression. What does it matter? It's a hunting tournament. Even if I'm not participating, I can still look the part. Yes, but... The look on her face told me she had a lot she wanted to say to that. I checked my reflection in the mirror again. I'd worn this outfit whenever I practiced with the crossbow. Hunting clothes and a ponytail. Dark pink hair fell down my back in waves. It suited my new dark grey jacket embroidered with the Eckhart coat of arms in gold, and the shorts that went with it nicely. I look just fine. I swung the crossbow I'd already loaded with metal pellets over my shoulder. Why are you taking the crossbow with you, my lady? You said you weren't feeling well, Emily said nervously. I got the feeling she was trying to dissuade me from bringing it. I heard there's a hunting area, with only small animals intended for women and children. I'm going to check it out later. You're going to go hunting? I'll get bored just sitting around at the tea party, I said glibly. At the same time, I remembered the promise I'd made to a certain someone I'd left at home. It would be embarrassing if I didn't manage to kill a single rabbit. After I was so confident, I recalled the soft laughter that had escaped his lips, and the way his eyes had danced with amusement. You think you can laugh at me? Just you wait. Mistress will catch enough to make you a scarf with, I thought resolutely to myself. Suddenly, I heard Reynolds' voice calling from outside the tent. Hey, how much longer are you going to take? I hurriedly shoved a cloth package of crossbow pellets and a velvet box into my pocket. See you, Emily. The Eckhart family men were ready and waiting when I stepped outside my lodging. What took you so long? Reynolds demanded angrily. Whoa. Most of the time I didn't pay Reynolds any mind, but I found myself scanning him from head to toe. He looked very handsome in his dark brown outfit, as did Derek in his elegant black one. As expected from a pair of love interests, they were both tall and attractive, and the striking hunting clothes only accentuated their good looks, so much so that I momentarily forgot about their terrible personalities and just enjoyed the eye candy. This would be much more enjoyable if I were in the real world just playing the game. That the game had been made a reality for me left a bitter taste in my mouth. I told you to wear something pretty, and why are you bringing that damn crossbow again? The Duke said with a frown when he saw the crossbow. He also didn't seem to approve of what I was wearing. I'm not entertaining any improbable outcomes, as advised, I said with a sidelong glance at the person who'd said those words. He didn't even blink, but the Duke cleared his throat as if he was the guilty party. I thought you said you weren't going to be doing any hunting. You said you weren't feeling well. Since I'm here, I thought I'd try my hand with the small animals at least. The Duke flinched, suddenly bending his head close to mine and whispering so that his sons couldn't hear what he was saying. You remember what I told you, right? What? If you want to shoot someone, get them alone first. Oh, I remembered the conversation I'd had with the Duke when he gave the crossbow to me, and why he'd replaced the bolts with magical pellets instead. You understand what I'm saying? He said, demanding a verbal response. His nervous blue eyes were filled with distrust. I'd seen a similar look on Emily's face just moments ago, when I had picked the crossbow up. I grinned at him. Of course, when we arrived at the entrance to the forest, where the opening ceremony was to be held, many nobles were already gathered. We'll go check on the horses, the Duke informed me, disappearing into the crowd with his sons. I skirted around those busily preparing for the hunt, and moved to the group no doubt waiting to see the participants off. Most of the people sitting in the shade of a canopy were women. The moment I appeared, the quiet dissolved into furious murmuring. I could feel more and more eyes boring into me, but I was more than used to it by now. Villains get this kind of attention wherever they go. However, I soon realized it wasn't simply curiosity or contempt that had people whispering about me. Glancing around, I realized why Emily had seemed so displeased earlier. I'm the only one wearing a hunting outfit. I was standing in a sea of fancy dresses, be it other ladies my age or high-ranking noblewomen. Everyone present seemed to be in a competition over who could wear the puffiest dress. They reminded me of peacocks trying to fluff up their feathers. They were all clutching fans or parasols, not hunting weapons, since I was the only one wearing hunting clothes. With an imposing crossbow on my back, it wasn't surprising that I stood out. My confidence wavered. I thought both men and women could participate in the hunt. Why was I the only one wearing this style of clothing, sticking out like a sore thumb? I began to regret not listening to Emily. No, they can't move around as comfortably as I can, I thought, trying to find the silver lining in this situation. If you are ready, please make your way to the center. Someone shouted from the podium. It was time for the hunt to begin. The nobles who'd finished inspecting their equipment began to gather, and it didn't take me long to find the Duke. Apparently, rank was reflected in even something so insignificant as where one stood in line. He was standing at the very front. He sat atop an impressive-looking horse clad in imposing, ornate magical armor, as one might expect from him as the head of his household. He was occupied talking to someone next to him. His sons hadn't arrived yet, it seemed. My eyes travelled over to the person positioned next to the Duke as I searched for Derek and Reynolds, and they widened in surprise when I registered who it was. Oh my, look, it's the Marquis, someone said. He didn't participate last year, but it seems he will this year. He's carrying a bow. Doesn't he look amazing? I could hear excited whispering all around me. The man the Duke was speaking to was none other than Winter. Chapter 68. Your Grace, it's good to finally see you again. Ah, Marquis Verdandi, nice to see you, the Duke replied, pleased to see Winter as he guided his horse closer. You haven't taken part in a hunting tournament for about a year now. You should come more often. I'm worried I might start to forget your face. Ha ha, hunting just isn't really my forte. You can improve at anything with enough practice. The Duke liked the young Marquis. He was polite and well-mannered. Though his father had passed away early and forced him to become the head of his house, he was more than capable of the role despite his age. If only he had a woman by his side, then he would be perfectly positioned. Many nobles dismissed the young Marquis as a child since he was yet to be married. The Duke, who had been dear friends with the previous Marquis, was worried that the younger man still had not found someone even after several years had passed. Have you received any gifts from the ladies? The Duke asked. I haven't ventured out in a while. Sadly, it seems no gifts were prepared for me. Winter replied with an awkward laugh. The maidens who had arrived in droves at the Marquis's campground that morning would have had a thing or two to say about this reply. The Duke, not knowing that Winter had refused every gift offered to him, tutted sadly. Tursky, you're just like my sons. You should be thinking about getting married and forming a family. You must have received a gift for the hunting tournament, then, Your Grace, Winter said, glancing at the left side of the Duke's jacket. I noticed the amulet you're wearing even at a distance. It seems to be the work of a fine craftsman. Ahem, you think so? Winter had been astute to mention it, it seemed, for the Duke's face turned red with a pleased flush. He puffed out his chest so that the amulet could be seen more easily. My sons didn't even notice. Perhaps they are blind. You've got quite the sharp eye. Not at all, Your Grace. It's a fitting accessory, considering your dignified station. I'm sure many others have taken note of it as well. Ha ha, you've quite the silver tongue. The Duke replied with false modesty and a big smile. My youngest daughter has very good taste. Winter's hands tightened on the reins, though the movement was too slight to catch anyone's notice. It was a gift from your daughter. Yes, well, I did tell her I didn't need any additional protection, but she insisted. Who in the Empire of Aoka would dare attack me after all? It was very expensive and imbued with a teleportation spell, of all things. It was hard to tell if the Duke was bragging or angry based on his tone, but he certainly seemed eager to emphasize how expensive and valuable the trinket was. The nobles around him began to shoot glances at the Duke, and the amulet upon hearing his overly loud voice. Your daughter has a good eye, Winter said, his face a mask stretched into a polite smile. It's a meaningful gift. She seems very wise. Indeed, you think so as well. The middle-aged Duke's face split into an even wider grin, which contrasted his supposedly angry outburst only moments ago. Of course, Winter said, knowing precisely what the Duke wanted to hear. The Duke, smiling contently since he'd successfully bragged about his daughter's gift, turned his eyes on the Marquis in order to return the compliment. He noticed something bright glinting from Winter's wrists. Your cufflinks are quite nice too. The color suits you very well. His cuffs were decorated with lapis lazuli, which was exactly the color of Winter's eyes. It was Winter's turn to visibly brighten. Do you think so? They were a gift. I'm happy that you noticed them. I thought you hadn't received any gifts. Have you started seeing someone? The Duke asked, surprised. Then he grinned. Which house is this lady from? Come now, out with it. Your father would be so pleased. It's not that sort of relationship, Winter replied somewhat mysteriously. It was true, but the Duke didn't seem to believe him at all. Absurd. You wore them here of all places, which must mean she's something special to you. Come, give me a hint as to who it is. The Duke's eyes glittered with curiosity, like a young lady who had just discovered a juicy piece of gossip. He appeared to have no idea that it was his daughter who had gifted them. Winter was wondering how he might avoid answering when he suddenly felt eyes on his face. A great many people were watching him, young ladies peering at him dreamily, and many nobles who were curious about what the Empire's only Duke was up to. But strangely enough, the girl with the dark pink hair and turquoise eyes stood out among the countless people staring at him. Their eyes locked the moment he looked up. She doesn't smile easily, Winter found himself saying. Doesn't smile easily, you say? She likes to keep her distance and always refuses me. Winter realized after he spoke just how correct that statement was. Perhaps I made a bad impression on her at our second meeting, Winter thought, recalling how that meeting had ended. Well, I'm not sure about that. I doubt we'll have much occasion to meet again. Her voice had been cold as she denied that they had any chance of meeting again. However, she had no way of knowing that he was the mage wearing the rabbit mask. No, please don't. I believe I informed the messenger that I wasn't interested in receiving any response. Which begged the question, why had she been so distant yesterday when he was meeting her as the Marquis? People generally took a liking to him, very easily thanks to his unfailingly good manners. Younger ladies in particular would blush and smile when he paid them the slightest attention, and that didn't change much even when he wore the rabbit mask. But that young lady, Winter somewhat belatedly realized that Penelope's attitude had been on his mind for a while. She has never smiled at me. The Duke's daughter, who was mired in countless rumors, was much colder, sharper, and more beautiful than he'd expected her to be. And so, her face was just as indifferent as ever, and a faint smile came to his face. I guess that's why the fleeting half-smiles I sometimes catch are so precious to me. My eyes only flitted across Winter's face momentarily. Affection score 32%. Seeing his affection score go up for no discernible reason, my eyes widened like saucers. I blinked repeatedly, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks on me, but it remained unchanged. 6% for just making eye contact. This wasn't normal mode, so there was no way this damned game would be so generous with giving out affection. I stared at the Duke and Winter, puzzled. The Duke, who had been listening carefully to Winter as he spoke, suddenly grinned and slapped Winter on the shoulder. "You into her," he hollered, though the noisy surroundings made it impossible to hear exactly what he had said. "Into her? What are those two talking about?" Winter gave a mysterious smile in response. I was still puzzling over the strange boost in his affection score when someone exclaimed, "Oh my, look! It's Lord Derek Eckhart and his brother." One of the women nearby was pointing somewhere behind me. I found myself turning to look, and discovered the brothers approaching their father. I guess a male protagonist is given that role for a reason, riding a white horse and a black horse respectively. They were more imposing and confident than any other noble in attendance. A sigh escaped my lips. "My God, he is so dashing," exclaimed one voice. "Do you think Lord Derek will accept my embroidered handkerchief?" asked another. I brought a protective bracelet for Lord Reynold. The ladies around me whined as they gazed at the brothers. As they began approaching the men cautiously, I couldn't help but wish they'd act their age. I looked around and noted that this must be considered the correct time for giving gifts. Many of the women were hurrying forward, most of them flocking to Derek or Reynold. I wonder if they'll still call them dashing after they learn about their god-awful tempers, I thought, laughing coldly to myself. Then I began rummaging in my pocket, remembering the little velvet box I'd brought with me. I stared down at it, falling into deep thought. Who should I give this to? I'd bought a total of 3 amulets from the weapon trader, one for Emily, one for the Duke, and one extra just in case I needed it. If I didn't have to participate in the hunting tournament, I had intended on giving it to Eccles, and in the case that I did have to, I had wanted to use it as protection for myself. I was beginning to think it would be wise to give it to one of the other love interests though. As I tried to figure out who to give it to, I immediately excluded Derek for all the nasty things he'd said that morning. I was a little touched by the ointment yesterday, so I should probably just give it to Reynold, but seeing Winter next to the Duke made me hesitate. Affection score 32% and affection score 31%. There was only a 1% difference in their affection scores. If I gave the gift to Winter, my plan to avoid getting involved with him would immediately go down the drain. Should I risk positioning him as my backup plan, or just go with Reynold and endure his no doubt endless mockery? At that moment, I was pulled roughly from my contemplation. Is that for me? Like a bird catching its prey, a hand shot out and snatched the velvet box from me. Chapter 69. What? Shocked, I turned to find my assailant. Golden hair shone under the noon sun. Ooh, an amulet. Far from being a viable candidate, the last man on earth that I would have considered giving the amulet to was opening the box which wasn't meant for him. "You must have chosen it to match my hair color," said the Crown Prince, examining the golden amulet I'd chosen that was imbued with a defensive spell. "What the hell is he going on about?" I gaped at him for a moment, then my face twisted into a scowl. "Give that back," I said, reaching for the box. He suddenly raised it above his head, holding it high enough that I could barely reach it. "Damn it, you asshole." Enraged, I stood on the very tips of my toes and jumped to try and grab it, but he only held it higher when I almost succeeded. I grunted and tried a few more times to snatch it, but he was just too tall. I found myself just jumping up and down with nothing to show for it, like a child playing a game. His laughter came from above me, very close, and tickled my forehead. When I stopped and looked up at him, I noticed that his eyes were full of mirth and he was smiling mockingly. I flushed and asked, "What do you think you're doing?" "It's mine, isn't it? Start playing coy and admit it." "No, it isn't." I wanted to shout at him, but I had no choice but to restrain myself. Affection score 10%, that 10% had been hard-earned after enduring the events of the game's predetermined storyline. And it was an affection score that didn't guarantee that I was safe from being killed just yet. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this," I said, gritting my teeth and smiling only through great effort, "but that gift isn't for you. Which bastard did you intend it for then? I'm sorry, tell me who it is." "I'll give it to him myself," he said, glaring around him with his creepy red eyes. I didn't know if it was just a habit, but his hand went to the sword at his waist, and I got the impression that if I told him someone's name he would use it, whether on myself or the person whom I named. Come on, he wasn't this insane in normal mode. I bit back a sigh with some effort. "It's meant for my second brother, Reynold." "Sorry about this, Reynold." I apologized inwardly as I threw him under the bus, thinking that he stood a better chance than someone like Winter, who was unrelated to me. Hearing that I'd intended to give the amulet to a member of my family seemed to mollify the Crown Prince somewhat, since he didn't actually draw his sword. "Well, it seems to me, sadly, that your brother is rather preoccupied at the moment and unlikely to be interested in your gift," he said tauntingly, glancing over at Reynold. I turned, wondering what he meant, and immediately frowned at what I found. Reynold and Derek were being practically swarmed by ladies approaching them to offer gifts. "Look, father, weren't you saying I'm unpopular?" Reynold shouted excitedly, finally able to mount a comeback against the criticism he'd received that morning from the Duke. The Crown Prince was right. I wasn't sure I would be able to wade through the crowd of women to actually give the gift to Reynold, and I don't really want to go through all that effort for him either, but by no stretch of the imagination did that mean I wanted to give it to the man in front of me. "I'm sure that there are many ladies who wish to offer you gifts, aren't there?" "I like this one," he said as he fished the amulet out of the box and pinned it to his chest. "Let's say it's a token of affection for the man you once loved deeply." "A token of affection," I repeated, gaping at him. "I just told you it was for my brother. Or perhaps think of it as a tribute ode to the Crown Prince from my loyal subject," he threatened, red eyes gleaming. If I didn't offer it as a gift, he intended to take it as tribute. Well, do as you wish then. What could I really do to stop him if he wanted the amulet that badly? I hadn't decided who I wanted to give it to anyway, and technically speaking, the Crown Prince was one of the love interests. Eyeing the amulet pinned to the Crown Prince's chest, I muttered hollowly, "It looks good on you." The compliment was forced and I didn't mean a word of it. However, the Crown Prince grinned as if he were pleased to hear it. "You think so? Affection score 12%. Well, that could have turned out worse, I suppose." His affection score rose by 2%. Just then, a loud horn sounded from the platform, signaling that the hunt was about to begin. The Crown Prince jumped easily onto his chestnut horse, before staring down at me with his usual arrogant air. "In return for your gift, I'll make sure to personally snare a beast worthy of my lady." No, you don't need to. Look forward to it." Before I could refuse him, he steered his horse to the Duke and my two brothers. "If you wanted to give me a gift, you could try staying away from me." As I was thinking of the words that I desperately wanted to say, the Crown Prince greeted the Duke in a loud voice. "Hello there, Duke Eckhart." Suddenly, tension fell over the participants that were waiting for the hunt to begin. Thanks to the abrupt quiet, this time I could hear the conversation clearly. "Greetings, second son of the Empire," the Duke said with a bow. Callisto seemed to study the Duke closely for a moment, before saying with an overly pleasant smile, "It seems you and I both received the same gift from my lady." "I'm sorry. Come to think of it, I wasn't able to ask her what my amulet was enchanted with." "What spell is yours imbued with, Duke? That lunatic." "Shut your mouth." My jaw was hanging open. At the prince's casual words, the Duke, Derek and Reynold all turned to look at me. Then it happened. Affection score -1% affection score, 29% affection score, -1% affection score, 30% Derek and Reynolds' affection scores, which had been at 30% and 31% respectively, dropped one after the other. If the Duke had an affection gauge as well, no doubt his score would have also decreased. I trembled with rage as I glared at the Crown Prince. He must have felt my furious glower since he turned and shamelessly waved at me. I seriously contemplated giving him the finger. Unfortunately, the horn indicating the beginning of the hunt sounded once more before I could put my thoughts into action. "Hiya, yeah," The nobles galloped toward the forest entrance, and the steady rumble of horse hooves against dirt was loud. When the dust finally settled, the clearing was completely empty. I didn't get a word in with anyone but the crown prince. Though I'd set my mind on avoiding the male protagonists, I hadn't intended for their affection scores to suffer. I was staring in the direction that my love interests had disappeared, filled with a mysterious sense of regret when a voice called my name. Lady Penelope Eckhart, a woman I'd never seen before, was giving me an elegant smile. "I was afraid you wouldn't come. I'm so happy you did." "Ah," I immediately realized who this was and wondered what to say in response. Though I was of a higher rank than her, she looked older than me. In addition, there was an unspoken custom in the Empire to regard those who were married as of a higher station than those who weren't. "Hello, Countess Dorothea," I finally said in a polite tone, bowing slightly. The real Penelope would have said something arrogant like, "Who the hell are you?" Or, "You should be honored I came. This is an opportunity for you to re-establish your position in high society, Penelope." But I recalled the expectation the Duke had looked at me with over breakfast. "P. Class equals caliber 1, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to spending a pleasant afternoon with you and the other ladies," I said politely. I hadn't really wanted to accept any invitations, but since I'd run into the host, it was hard to refuse. She seemed a little surprised by my greeting, perhaps finding me less insane than the rumors about the Eckhart house's rabid dog had suggested. She pulled herself together, though, and gave me a peculiar smile. "The tea party began at noon, actually. We've already gathered. Would you like to join me?" Countess Dorothea said, turning and beginning to lead me away. I considered her mysterious smile as I followed. Something doesn't feel right. But then again, it's not as if there would be any male protagonists set on killing me in attendance. How could anything bad happen between noble ladies drinking tea? If things turn out boring, I'll just find an excuse and make my escape, I thought offhandedly. As was always the case in the game, the tea party wasn't at all what I expected it to be. Chapter 70. Next to the broad clearing at the entrance of the forest where the hunting tournament was being held, there was a second, smaller clearing. It looked as if it had been designed to give the women somewhere to socialize amongst greenery while they waited for the tournament to end. As the Countess had informed me, the long table decorated with flowers at the center was already mostly filled. "Everyone," called the hostess, clapping her hands together once sharply. "Can I have your attention? Look who I brought with me." "Oh my, so she came." The women each exclaimed softly as I followed behind Countess Dorothea, though it was hard to tell if they were reacting positively or not since many of them spoke from behind fans. "You don't need to censor yourself on my behalf." I didn't recognize any of them. The tea party consisted of a wide variety of guests of all ages. I was puzzled to find that most of them were accompanied by a maid, unlike me, as I'd left Emily behind. I only needed a brief glance to see that none of them were wearing hunting clothes like I was. Though I'd noticed it earlier, it was a reminder that I alone stood out because of my outfit. The thought left a bitter taste in my mouth. Should I have brought Emily with me? Nobody said anything about bringing a maid. I was starting to regret not bringing her, and was afraid that the ladies would judge me as rude for not recognizing any of them. I decided to refrain from speaking as much as I could. "Thank you for having me," I said, bowing only slightly so as not to appear too docile. I felt many eyes on me, all filled with strange emotions that I couldn't put my finger on. Their expressions reminded me of the odd look that I'd seen on Countess Dorothea's face when I'd greeted her. "Now, please have a seat over here, my lady." Thankfully, she didn't childishly leave me to stand there awkwardly, but instead quickly suggested I take the seat right next to her own. It also just so happened to be the seat that would put me at the center of everyone's attention, which was unexpected given Penelope's terrible reputation. "Pour her some tea," Countess Dorothea instructed the maid standing behind her. A steaming yellow tea was poured into the cup in front of me. "This is a rare tea that my husband brought back from his diplomatic mission to Cetina. Please try some." The Countess had suggested it softly, so I picked up my cup. I'd shown so little interest in attending these kinds of social events that the Duke had chided me, encouraging me to spend more time with other nobles. Now that I found myself sitting at a tea party, I felt both awkward and a little, "Damn it, I'm a bit nervous." I sniffed the tea carefully and pretended to take a sip, before placing the cup back down carefully. "It smells lovely, Countess." In actuality, it didn't smell very good at all, perhaps because it was from a country that was unfamiliar to me. There was a faint aroma to the tea that didn't agree with my stomach. I knew, however, that saying so out loud probably wasn't appropriate in my current company. "Is that so? I'm so glad to hear you say that. I'm sure you all agree." said Countess Dorothea, laughing loudly and turning to the rest of the ladies. Of course, that's great to hear. Some of the women replied with their fans fluttering over their lips once again. I internally breathed a sigh of relief, glad that I'd successfully maneuvered the social niceties thus far. Someone called out to me then, "My lady, I heard that you were incredible at yesterday's festival." It was the young lady seated opposite me who had spoken, perhaps 15 or 16 years old, her chair tucked in close to the table, so she could peer at me more closely with great eagerness. She looked very young, her large eyes shining with curiosity. Oh, well, I didn't really do anything all that remarkable. I smiled and waved my hands around awkwardly, as if to deny any spectacular heroics on my part. Modesty is a noble virtue, I thought, somewhat pleased with myself. The young lady seemed enamored by my blasé response since she blushed and continued excitedly. Stories were spreading all over the palace about you yesterday. Oh, is that so? She suddenly pouted and said, yes, I had to retire to my tent early because I wasn't feeling well, and I missed it all. Wait, Lady Aries, you mean to tell me you missed that delightful scene? Someone questioned in a surprised tone before I could respond. I glanced over in an attempt to find the owner of the voice, but it seemed to be one of the many ladies hiding their faces behind a fan. I turned away uninterested. So her name is Lady Aries, I thought, committing to memory the name of the lady who'd taken an interest in me. I wanted to memorize her name to avoid making a fool of myself later, but I also had every intention of making some friends among the other ladies, as the Duke had suggested. The women seated at the table began to chat about my deeds from the day before. Lady Penelope shoots so well. It was truly a wonder to watch her defeat the beast so quickly. One lady said, really? I wish I could have been there, said another. Of course. Lady Aries, you may very well regret not being there yesterday for the rest of your life. But my lady, how was it that you were able to improve so quickly in such a short period? Most of the ladies speaking were older than me, and they were starting to adopt a slightly condescending tone, though I was of a higher rank than them all. I noticed it right away, but didn't bother calling them out on it. That kind of social back and forth was only human nature. Besides, my reputation is in tatters. This isn't all that bad, all things considered. There was no need to ruin the relaxed mood of the tea party by getting worked up about something that didn't really matter. Instead, I reacted with polite laughter. Anyone can improve very quickly if they practice hard and have a good teacher. My goodness, I wonder who you were planning to shoot this time that motivated you to practice so diligently, muttered the woman seated diagonally across from me, covering her mouth with her gloved hand. Her tone was mocking, and her voice was surprisingly loud. I'm sorry, I stared at her wondering if I'd misheard. She seemed to be about my age, and the blue of her hair wasn't easily forgotten. Her eyelashes blinked at me prettily, as if in greeting as we made eye contact. She looked so gentle and sweet that it was hard to believe such a mocking jab had come from her lips. Lady Kellen, were you there to witness Lady Penelope's performance yesterday? Asked the host, easily initiating conversation once more amidst the sudden, awkward silence. A sense of déjà vu washed over me. Lady Kellen's. I've heard that name before, the blue-haired woman beamed. Of course, Countess. What was it like? Please share the details. Lady Aries begged, bouncing in her chair. Even though I was the topic of conversation, I had the feeling that I was rapidly losing control of the situation. Nobody else seemed to think anything was strange, though, as they waited eagerly for Lady Kellen to speak. Actually, I felt very safe since Lady Penelope was there with her crossbow. Lady Kellen said, Safe? How so? Oh, come to think of it, you've been praising her skill with the crossbow since last year, Lady Kellen. The other ladies chimed in. She's been praising my skills. That can't be right. I tilted my head, confused by her absurd claim. Something occurred to me. Wait a second. I suddenly remembered who the blue-haired lady was. I'd forgotten about her altogether, since I hadn't actually been responsible for the incident the previous year, and I had assumed I would never cross paths with her. She's the girl from last year. She was the lady who'd become the queen of the hunt after Penelope threw a fit and aimed a crossbow at her. I'm screwed. A chill travelled down my spine, and I had a feeling that this tea party wasn't going to turn out too well for Penelope, and therefore myself. I was reminded of her behaviour during last year's hunting tournament. Lady Kellen continued, while I worked through the stormy emotions that this turn of events had summoned. She aimed her crossbow right at me, and told me she was trying to kill a mosquito that was flying near me. Good heavens! The women seated around the table began throwing sidelong glances at me as they exclaimed dramatically, You mean that rumour was actually true? Countess Dorothea asked, making a huge fuss. Oh, I couldn't possibly comment on any rumors floating about. But Lady Penelope here didn't aim her weapon at me for an undignified or irrational reason, I'm sure. Please don't misunderstand. She was only attempting to do me a kindness by offering to kill that pesky mosquito. She grinned cheekily at me, and I realized what a hateful creature she was. Hey, if you wanted me to curse you out, all you had to do was ask. She was very talented at twisting words, insulting me to my face under the guise of casual conversation. I was beginning to grow angry, even if I wasn't the one whose actions she was making a mockery of. No wonder Penelope had wanted to shoot her. I felt so bad for Lady Penelope because of all the rumors that went around after last year, but I'm so relieved I'm able to clear everything up now. Apparently, she wasn't done with me yet. She peered over at me and continued slyly. Yesterday she was against a monster as big as a house, not some tiny mosquito. Of course, I wasn't worried that she might accidentally hit someone. She's not blind, after all. In other words, she was suggesting it would have been pathetic if I couldn't shoot a monster that big at close range. Why were my terrible gut feelings always correct? I now knew why the Countess had been so eager to invite me to this little gathering. No wonder I felt like there was something odd about their smiles. With the blue-haired lady in the lead, the women had lured me in and sprung their trap. Now it was time for them to bear their venomous stingers at me, their freshly caught prey.